Okay, let's get started. Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining this session today. In our session, we're going to be discussing the different factors that can affect your conversion rates. We're going to talk about the trade-offs that you make and the different levers that you can influence to ultimately increase your revenue. My name is Mac. I'm a strategic account manager here at Stripe, and I work with companies to help them manage their payment cycle. I have a lot of experience in helping fast-growing companies optimize their payment strategy, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of the best practices we've seen along the way. Now, to get us started, I started reflecting on some of the consumer experiences I've had recently, some good and some not so good. And so I want to share an experience about an online buyer experience I had that left me feeling slightly frustrated. Now, this story requires a little bit of context. When I first moved to Singapore almost 5 years ago, I knew that decision meant that I'd be missing some special moments for the people that I love the most in my life. And so I made a promise to myself that I would do my best never to forget to celebrate one special day for them. And over the years, I've done pretty well, except for Mother's Day of this year. I woke up in the morning on Sunday to realize I had completely missed out on Mother's Day. Now, the good news is it wasn't Mother's Day yet in San Francisco, where my mom is based. And so I still had time to figure something out. And I scrambled to find the only flower delivery shop that still had same-day delivery slots available. Found the flowers that I liked, wrote the thoughtful message from her loving daughter who would never forget Mother's Day, completed all the delivery details. But unfortunately, when I got to the checkout page, I found a notification that my payment had failed and that my order wasn't confirmed. So I thought, okay, well, this is a pain. Let me try again. I re-entered all the information, completed the checkout process once more, but I still got the same result. Now, I don't know exactly why my payment failed in this moment, but we're going to talk about some of the reasons that drive these declines. But it was really frustrating, and this frustration is very common, especially for cross-border online commerce. And what the real shame is this flower app not only lost me for this Mother's Day, but they lost me for future celebrations as well, because I know that my payment method isn't working with their platform. Now, let's look at what should have happened in the ideal world. If a customer is who they say they are, and if they have the funds available, and they have purchase intent and are ready to make a purchase with your business, then it should just be seamless. It should be super fast. And here's what that would look like in the checkout experience. They would breeze through your checkout forms, no issues there. Your fraud tools would perfectly detect the legitimate customers from the illegitimate customers. And the issuing banks, which are of course the cardholder's bank. An issuing bank is essentially that bank that gives your customer his or her card. Sometimes it's the logo on the credit card itself. Now, that issuing bank ultimately has to accept or decline that transaction. And in the ideal world, they would accept all of the ones that you want to get through. And it should be that simple, money in the bank for your business. But we don't live in the ideal world. Let's look at what actually happens in this funnel. So you start first with this big pool of revenue. You've worked really hard to drive customers to your product. You've spent a long time building a product that customers want. The first place they land is your checkout. Global studies show that checkout cart abandonment rates have reached up to 76%. That means 3/4 of your customers don't even make it through the checkout. Now, for those that do make it through the checkout, we hope that they're all safe customers and that you want to do business with them. But ultimately, we know that there's fraudulent customers that get through. And fraud is really painful and really expensive. We know it can cost up to businesses up to 2% of their total revenues. That's more margin falling out of the funnel. Now, finally, those transactions that do get through, as I mentioned earlier, need to get accepted. We call that network acceptance. And we know that network acceptance for offline, card present, in-person transactions are really high typically, but the online transactions often have up to 10% lower acceptance rates. All of these areas represent revenue that gets lost in this conversion funnel. And so at this point, you're probably thinking, well, this session is not particularly uplifting. But I'm here to share that where there is gaps, there is opportunity to improve. And what we see is that the businesses who take this seriously and take effort to improve their conversion can see significant revenue gains. Many of the users that we work with often view payments as something that's infrastructural, something that's required, and something, of course, technological, but not something that's necessarily strategic or not a revenue driver. But we know that users that take the time to optimize each area of this funnel can turn payments into a strategic advantage for their business and ultimately recover a lot of the revenue that gets lost there and have a big impact on their business overall. And so let's dive into this funnel. We're going to look at each element of this funnel so that you're prepared with your teams to own these conversations internally. Now, to get us started, what's interesting is when you view this funnel from the customer perspective and the customer lens, each area of this funnel happens simultaneously. So it's within a millisecond. Your customer doesn't see some of the things happening on the back end here. But what we know is that each variable of this funnel is interdependent. And that means if you change one, it's definitely going to impact the other. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say you shrink down your checkout form. You want to do this because it will help you optimize checkout completion. And yes, that's great. You'll have people flowing through your checkouts. But ultimately, you may not be collecting enough information for your fraud tools to detect enough signals. And you may not get enough information for the issuing banks on the final end of that transaction to feel comfortable accepting it. And so you decide, okay, never mind, let's flip it on its head. You expand your checkout form. This is great for your fraud tools and your network acceptance, but you're definitely going to see a hit on checkout completion because the more friction that you include, the more details you collect, the more areas you have for people to drop off. And so at this point, you're probably thinking, well, which one is right? And the truth is, there is no one size fits all. Every business has to have this discussion internally based on your customer audience and your business goals. Now, that discussion requires a lot of collaboration. And what we often see is that businesses run this discussion and this funnel across different teams and functions within a business. And of course, that's okay if you're a large business and you have lots of different stakeholders influencing this. But what's challenging is when we see businesses having siloed discussions, experiments, and goals for each segment of this funnel. What that means is you see that teams like marketing or design are only optimizing for checkout without thinking about what the implications for fraud and your finance team could be. And so one best practice that I want to share with you to get us started is to opt into a one-team mentality. This means driving a lot of collaboration amongst this unit to achieve shared goals. And so what that looks like in real time is things like shared experiments that test the full impact of the funnel, as well as shared goals and KPIs. If each team is measured on different things, you're never going to achieve the same outcomes. I've talked to some users who have businesses where their fraud team is goaled very heavily on preventing fraud. Now, you can protect your business against all the fraud in the world, but you may not then achieve your sales goals. So it really depends on this team working together, having shared views and shared metrics, and of course, shared experiments to optimize. Now, to get started on that conversation, I'm going to now empower you with some of the best practices of each level of this funnel so that you can be fully prepared in those internal discussions and collaborations. So the first area that we're going to deep dive in on is checkout. Now, the name of the game when it comes to checkout is to remove friction. Now, one easy hack that you can do to see where you may be including unnecessary friction is to simply go through your own checkout. Think back to the last time you went through your platform's checkout. If it wasn't in the last month, you're missing out. And what I'd encourage you to do is do this frequently and often and invite other folks in your business, maybe those that are removed from your function, maybe those in completely different parts of the business, to also complete this exercise so they can provide their feedback. In fact, this exercise can be done by anyone in the business. Now, Stripe recently had our own CEO and co-founder go through our onboarding and checkout experience and flow. We thought we were doing pretty well, but he wrote up 10 pages of notes where we could do better and we were inputting unnecessary friction for our users. And so I'd encourage you to invite your leadership to do the same, but I also think new hires are a great resource to do this with as well because they bring fresh eyes. And so at Stripe, we're really passionate, heck, even obsessive about inputting the best experiences for checkouts and removing as much friction as possible. And there's lots of things that you can do to remove friction. Some of these are featured here. Many of you may already be doing some of these in your business. But I want to highlight 3 of the most common mistakes we see for businesses today operating on online checkout environments. Now, the first is called real-time card validation. What it essentially does is in real time, when your customer is inputting his or her card details on their site, on your site, does your checkout form in real time tell them you've made a typo or your expiry date has already passed? Or does it even validate the card brand that's being used? We see that up to 38% of businesses only provide this. That means that almost 2/3 are not providing it. And it's a very easy way for your user to know in real time if they've made a mistake. You don't want to make your customer have to get through the full completion of the checkout, only then to inform them after they've hit confirm that there's been an issue. So tell them in real time to help avoid this friction. The next area that we see is autofill, one of my personal favorites. We see about 21% of businesses do not support autofill. That means that roughly 80% do, so your customers are expecting it. And we know that all browsers support this as well, both in the desktop and in the mobile environments. Now, autofill is a real no-brainer. And I want to share a personal experience I had with some online shopping that'll help demonstrate that. Just last week, I was riding on the train home and I was browsing for some online deals. I found some things that I was interested in on one site and I completed everything in my cart. Unfortunately, when I got to the checkout, I saw that this didn't support autofill. And I wasn't interested in pulling out my card and inputting my details on the train. That's something I wouldn't do. And so I thought, okay, I'll come back to it later. But no surprise, I didn't go back to it. And probably you have many experiences like this as well. Autofill would have made that checkout experience incredibly simple. And we want to enable your buyers to have that same experience when they have that purchase intent. Now, if you're not supporting autofill, one area that we'd really encourage for mobile is numeric keypad. This is simply providing the keypad in your app or website to help your customers input their card details as easily as possible. We see that almost 1/3 of businesses fail to do this. Now, especially if you have a lot of users coming in via mobile, this is a simple hack to make the experience easy as possible for them. You can imagine entering 16 digits via a smartphone keypad is a pretty big hassle. Now, as I was thinking about this recommendation, I thought, well, I never really noticed this before, but I'll tell you what, I definitely notice when it's not there because it is a pain. And so you want to make it as easy as possible for your customers to input their card details, especially that on mobile. Now let's talk about mobile for a second. Mobile really deserves our attention, and that's because over 50% of e-commerce traffic comes on mobile today, but the cart abandonment rates are almost 2x that of desktop. That means that people are quicker to jump ship when it's mobile. And across Asia Pacific, these numbers are higher than anywhere else in the world. And so if you have a large audience accessing your platform or your site via mobile, we'd really encourage you to look at these optimizations you can make in checkout. We'd also encourage you to think about the role that mobile wallets can play for your business. Anything from Apple Pay to Alipay can offer very significant uplift and remove friction for your users as they approach your business via mobile. So we've covered a few different past practices here, but all of these learnings are built into the way that we build and ship our products for checkout. We believe that these learnings need to be optimized for every checkout experience. And so whether you're looking for something that can get up and running in minutes, or if you want a more customizable UX design block, we have both options to help users build this. And if you're operating businesses in Europe, all of our checkout platforms are optimized for strong customer authentication. This means that your business is protected against any of the regulations that are upcoming to help you optimize your checkout by collecting the correct amount of information. So I'd highly encourage those on the call, as you learn about checkout best practices, do see what your payments partners can provide you today and see what's possible with your current checkout to remove as many friction moments as you can. Okay, we've gotten folks through the checkout. Now, as I mentioned, lots of those folks that get through will be good for your business and they will be safe, but some may be fraudulent, and fraud is really challenging. So let's deep dive into fraud for a few moments. It's important to first place the challenge of fraud in the areas that it costs business, and that's two areas in particular. The first is in the cost of fraud itself and the cost of the chargeback associated. Now, a chargeback is essentially when a card holder or customer sees a charge item on their credit card statement and they raise a dispute or a chargeback against it. And this isn't just for cards, this could be for other payment methods as well. But it's essentially a customer saying, I didn't make this purchase, or maybe I didn't receive this purchase. There's various reasons for why a customer could create a chargeback. But this is pretty expensive. Let's take an example business that you can really paint the picture of how much fraud would cost. Let's say you are a sunglasses business and you've sold a pair of sunglasses. You've already sent out that order to the user, so your sunglasses have already left your business, and then the bank comes back and informs you that the cardholder has disputed the charge because their credit card number was stolen, and in fact, they didn't order those sunglasses. So the cost of the sunglasses will be immediately pulled back from you and given back to the cardholder. Now there's also a chargeback fee, and this ranges by market, but it could be up to somewhere like $30 different. This is a lost product, a full refund, and a chargeback fee that impacts your business, not to mention the operational costs of managing that refund and this whole chargeback process. Now, this is one area here, and you can see it's pretty painful, but the other area of fraud that's also equally as painful is lost revenue from legitimate purchases and legitimate transactions that were incorrectly flagged as fraud. And we call that a false positive. It's essentially when you falsely identify something as a positive fraud. But what it basically means is you've blocked something that was actually safe and legitimate from entering your business. And we see that the cost of false positives reaches up to 1% to 2% for businesses each year. So taking it all together, it's a big pain. It's really challenging, and it's hard to stay in front of because every year fraud gets more sophisticated and more complex. So let's talk a little bit more about how you can take fraud into your own hands. Now, it's important first to understand that fraud does not treat each business the same. It really punishes each business differently. And what I mean by that is it's fully dependent on your business profile. So what you see here is a range of business types and the different ranges of fraud that they can or cannot accept. On both axes, you have two different types of fraud. You have actual, legitimate fraud costs, and then you have the amount of false positives. Now, you're seeing two different business types on board here. Let's start first with sunglasses, as we've shared before. This sunglasses business makes a very small margin on every pair of sunglasses they send. Let's say it's $10 per pair, and they're making $1 on each pair that they're selling. That means that a fraudulent charge or a chargeback on that pair of sunglasses, the fee of the chargeback may be higher than the pair that was actually worth in the first place. And so if you're a sunglasses business or any business that has really slim margin, it may take several legitimate transactions and the margin from those transactions to pay for the fraudulent charge. And so it's really important, if you're a slim margin business, you need to have a tighter approach to fraud. You need to have more thresholds set and more of a barrier to protect your business so less fraud comes in because it's really costly for your business. Now let's look at the other type of business. Let's say you're a software business that has very high margin. The goal here then would be to allow as many legitimate customers in as possible, which may mean lowering your risk thresholds. And that may mean you get more fraudulent charges, but it also means that you're going to get far less false positives. You don't want to be turning away customers who were legitimate just because your risk thresholds were too high. And the reason you're okay with that is because as a higher margin business, it's actually not that expensive for you to receive a chargeback because you've made most of the margin on that sale and you can refund it pretty easily and recoup your losses. Not too bad. So every business falls somewhere on this scale, and it's totally up to you to decide where you fall. And what I will say is a lot of businesses have different approaches based on the customer segments, the products that are sold, and even the markets that they operate in. So I'd encourage you to take a really dynamic approach to this. You don't need to create a one-size-fits-all for your business. You can set your fraud logic to be dependent on all of these factors. And the best way to do that is to access as much data as possible to make your decisions. And so when you think about the data that's available to you, of course you have your own internal data, but we also encourage you to work with your payments partners to understand fraud trends across the network so that you can make your data more well-rounded. And in fact, at Stripe, data is really important to the way that we build our fraud logic. We have thousands of signals that look at every single transaction to identify whether it's fraudulent or safe or legitimate. And it's really in the power of our network. All of our fraud logic is driven by machine learning. And like anything machine learning, the bigger the network, the more information you're going to have. And so what's really cool is whilst a card may be new to your business, there's actually an 89% chance that we've seen that card somewhere else on the Stripe network. And that can just be an additional signal that your business can use. And so I encourage you, think about the data sources you have available, both internal on your customer bases, also through your payments partners, as you build a really holistic view of what your fraud strategy will be. All right, We've gotten through checkout, we've gotten through fraud. Now let's talk about network acceptance. What you're seeing here are a stream of decline codes. Some of them have very vague descriptions. Some of them are not as vague, like insufficient funds. We know what that means. But more often than not, we see the catch-all decline code 05 do not honor, the vaguest of them all. And a lot of the users we work with often ask, what does this even mean? Well, the truth is, do not honor can stand for a lot of different things. And so let's look at the top 3 reasons that drive declines. The first is no funds available or insufficient funds. We see this especially common with prepaid cards and debit cards. This means that that cardholder doesn't have enough funds in his or her bank to pay for the transaction. The next most common area is outdated or incorrect credentials. We know that the lifespan of a card is just a few years, and so very often you'll see that your customers have just outdated credentials with your business, and that could be driving declines. And third, one particularly interesting one, is suspicion of fraud or risk. And that suspicion is coming from the issuing bank on the other end of that transaction. So just like your business has fraud models and fraud logic, so do banks. And so banks will take a call on every transaction to decide whether that transaction was fraudulent or suspicious. And each bank has their own logic dependent on them, but we're going to talk through some of the strategies that you can take to help maximize this, especially when you're an international cross-border business. Now, declines are painful for all businesses, but they're especially painful for one business type, and that's recurring revenue businesses. For all of those of you who run subscription businesses, you know that a subscription is not about a one-time transaction. Subscription is really a contract for a series of future transactions, and one decline in that contract will completely ruin it. And so it's really painful for subscription businesses who receive declines early on in that subscription life cycle. And we know that it's often. Studies show that 9% of invoices fail after the first invoice. And so Stripe users are helping recover some of that revenue. We've been able to recover up to 41% of the initially lost, declined, failed invoices for our billing users. Stripe Billing is our subscriptions platform that helps you run your business. And all of these optimizations are driven by some of the optimizations we have for retries. Now, subscription retries is something quite common for subscription platforms and technology. It's called dunning. Maybe you've heard of that before. But what we see often with dunning is that it's a fairly static approach. This means that, let's say you get a decline on the first of a week. And so you decide, okay, I'll retry that charge a week later. Still fails. So you say, okay, I'll retry it a week after that. And so it goes. But as you see here, you're not really changing here with any dynamic approach. What we see is if you take a more dynamic view of retries, you're going to have a lot better chance of recovering that initially declined transaction. Let me share a few examples of how we help users do this. The first is, of course, looking at issuer behaviors and signals to understand when is the best time to retry this card. Remember earlier on I told you that each issuer has their own fraud logic. So let's take an example. Let's say you're a Singapore-based platform, but you have customers around the world. And so you try to charge a subscription in what is the middle of the night for your European customer. Chances are their bank is going to have higher thresholds during times that they deem most suspicious, like maybe throughout the night, and they're going to be less likely to accept the transaction. We're going to help you retry that logic and retry that transaction in the time of day that that bank is most likely to accept the transaction. Think about where your customers are around the world and build your retry logic to optimize based on their locations. Another example of how we run smart retries is looking for signals across the network that that card has been used with a different merchant. Of course, if that card is being successfully used somewhere else, it's probably a good indicator that it's ready to be used for your business as well. And there's lots of different approaches that you can take. Think about when payday is. If payday in your country happens every 2 weeks, maybe think about retrying after payday, or if it's at the end of the month. I'd encourage you to manage your retry logic in a way that's dynamic based on where your customers are around the world, what their buying preferences are, and different insights that you can gather from both your internal data and your payments partners' data. This will help you optimize your retry success. Now, even if you're not a subscription business, declines are still really painful. And so I want to share with you some of the technology we're leveraging to help you optimize against these declines. Now, in order to explain this, let's talk about what happens when a decline does happen for a singular transaction. So essentially what happens is after your customer makes the purchase, Stripe or your payments partner will send a message request to the credit card networks, and then that credit card network will send it on to the banks. And that message request can have over 100 different elements in it with various parameters. Now, right away, the banks and the credit card networks will tell your payments partner whether they should approve or decline this transaction. And so in real time, we'll be able to say, should we retry that transaction because we got an initial decline, but we believe it's legitimate? And what changes do we need to make in that 100+ parameter message to make sure that we're going to optimize for acceptance? And so within a millisecond, we'll make that call through our machine learning powered retries engine, and we'll alter the message and resend it back to the bank and try and improve our decline rate. Now, initial responses have been very promising. We've been able to recover over 5% of those initially declined transactions. And what's really powerful about this is it's all under the layer. On the back end, you haven't had to lift a finger. And so we're really excited to see the way that technology trends can help improve something like minimizing your decline rates and get more business that's ready for your business across the line. So we've covered a lot here. This is the full conversion funnel, from checkout to fraud to network acceptance. As you can see here, with a few simple improvements, you can make serious impact on the revenue that reaches your business at the end of the day. But let's talk about the 3 top takeaways here. The first is that removing friction is really all about the small details of your checkout. It's things like card brand and real-time card validator, autofill, a numeric keypad. It's things like mobile wallets. This is really important as your business scales to make sure that you're creating a checkout experience that is as easy as possible for your users to get to, and it's all in the details. The second main takeaway is that fraud is really dependent on your business model. Depends on your margin profile as a business, the markets that you operate in, and your customer segments. And so we'd encourage you to have those discussions internally about what your goals are. That way you can set fraud logic that's dynamic and customized to your business. And finally, even the non-visible infrastructural parts of your payments checkout will be very impactful. And so we'd encourage you to always look to the latest trends in technology that power your payments experience. The more that you can do to align yourself with a technology partner that drives some of the success, uses the highest levels of innovations, the better off you're going to be on achieving some of your revenue goals, like improving your acceptance rates. And so go find out what's possible today with your current technology stack and what can you do to improve. So we've reached the end here, and I hope you've learned a whole lot about the impacts that you can have on your own conversion with these 3 different areas. If you want to learn more about this topic, of course you can visit us at stripe.com, and you can also write to us at sales@stripe.com. We're really excited to hear from you, and we wish you all the best as you master the art of conversion. Thanks so much for joining.